E agora, então, para falar sobre a modernização do mercado financeiro brasileiro, nós chamamos aqui o palestrante internacional, o senhor Robert Sagurton, diretor da R37.
Thank you. Palestrante internacional. I'm just a palestrante brasileiro. I moved to Brazil 3 months ago. So I'm just palestrante doméstico for now. So guys, thank you to RTM, thank you to Accenture. It's a pleasure to come up here and talk a little bit about what R3 is thinking about for Brazil. I'd like to start with a story. So when I first arrived in Brazil, when I used to come on vacation, when we called taxis, the only option was teletaxi, right? So you called a number, and there was like a telephonic fixo at some corner and a bunch of taxistas smoking cigarettes. And me not speaking Portuguese and always lost, they would usually just hang up on me, right? And so it never really worked out. So now that we have Uber and 99 Taxi, my life is so much better, right? But when you think about that, and last year, one of the questions asked was, how long will it take for blockchain to really make an impact? And I actually hate that question. I definitely hate when people say it's 10 years, because I think the better question to ask is, how long will it take for the financial service client community to accept the inefficiencies? So going back to the taxi example, that was the only option we had, so we all accepted it. However, when the client community, thank you, the client community got a taste of inefficiency with apps, very quickly the expectations changed. So how do we bring that back to financial services? Well, let's talk about some of the inefficiencies in financial services. For one, the fact that if you want to pay somebody in Brazil on a Sunday, you can't, right? You can pay them, you can initiate a payment, but it doesn't happen until Monday. The fact that if I want to pay somebody or if I want to receive a payment, I need to give that person and their bank my CPF. Why do I need to do that? I don't necessarily want to do that. I just want to get the value, right? So when I look at these inefficiencies and I think about how long will it take for the client community to accept some of these things, I don't think it's going to be 10 years. I actually don't think it's going to be 5 years. I think as more efficient financial transactions can be done on cellular phones, real time, their expectations in the next 1 to 3 years are going to change drastically. And the question, are we as a financial services industry set up from a collaboration standpoint, from a shared services standpoint, from a network standpoint, to meet these very rapidly changing demands of the client community? And I think we all agree that we're not, right? Most of our infrastructure is based on technology from decades ago, right? Most of the infrastructure is closed and not open for this budding startup community into Brazil to innovate and create new apps that meet the demands of those clients. And that's really what this is all about. So there we go. Okay, so one of the other things is somebody really smart in Brazil said they went around to the most respected people they know in blockchain and asked all three of them, what does blockchain mean for Brazil? And they got 3 different answers. And that is a problem. One of my goals is to try to get some consensus around what does this really mean, and be able to explain it to anybody, not people in technology, but the average person on the street, the business people, the executives, anybody. So what I'd like to do is kind of take a shot of what we think it means for Brazil and what our vision is. So really what we're doing is it's a modernization of the financial network to achieve 2 things: frictionless value transfer and optimization of data sharing, right? So that's really what this is all about. And it's interesting that if you look at the Bitcoin blockchain, that was their goal as well. However, on the Bitcoin blockchain, the values was to disintermediate regulators and banks, right? And achieve that. Our values are to do this in a way that includes regulators and banks and all the protections and security and privacy that they afford their clients. So that's the goal. Now, the other thing that we get from this is essentially, it's not just about the blockchain. So, I think people are very focused on just blockchain when actually it's a reimagination of the entire financial network service. So the conversations that are happening in places like the February Blockchain Working Group are much bigger than just blockchain. As an example, identity. So for any of these projects or these initiatives or the solutions to work, we need to solve for identity, whether that's individual identity or legal identity. And the place that the most interesting conversations are happening are these blockchain working groups within R3 as well. So it's not just about the blockchain, it's about the collaboration and it's about the exhaust of positive things that are coming out of this collaboration. But the enabler is blockchain. So I said reimagination of business, driving standards, and then the last thing is an openness of the financial markets. So today, I'm in a WeWork office with all these really interesting Brazilian startups. And I always think if you have a great idea for a financial service startup, where do you start, right? So, the current financial market, if you're some guy sitting in his house with a great idea, maybe you're a developer, where do you start? How do you get access to the code of the current financial market to fill in the gaps, to innovate, right? And the reality is closed and you can't. And I feel for those people, right? So the idea is on an open source platform, like Corda, but like Hyperledger Fabric, like Ethereum, that this startup community has free access to that code so they can develop prototypes. So the idea is that a prototype can be developed on the existing financial service platform on an open source code and then presented to the regulators and the banks, and they're already familiar with the underlying platform. So that's the real opportunity. So it's not just about blockchain, but it's about all these other things that blockchain is enabling. So why is Brazil different? I love talking about this. So first of all, so I worked in the US, so I had a chance to work with the US market. At R3, I have the opportunity to see what's going on in Asia and Europe. And Brazil is very different. And I'm not sure you guys being here always kind of recognize or appreciate the amount of assets you have to really be a leader in innovation and blockchain. The first thing, there's a history of collaboration. Maybe it was because of hyperinflation, but it happens, right? And that collaboration and that fast payment initiative didn't happen in the US, right? And in the US, it actually takes a lot longer to send a payment peer-to-peer than it does in Brazil because of it. But the collaboration is key because the networks already exist in Brazil. And that's really the heavy lift of this stuff. So the technology is easy, right? We have, everybody has kind of the same partners and the same technology to leverage all over the world. But it's really getting people in the room, all of the players, the regulators, the banks, the market infrastructures, and coming up with a common vision and working towards a common goal. And Brazil has that more than any other country in the world. So with great power comes great responsibility. So the pressure's on for us to actually deliver. As I said, the February Blockchain Working Group is another unique asset in Brazil. There's no other banking association working group like that in the world. And definitely no other one that invites regulators and exchanges and market infrastructures. So everybody's at the table. So now it's time to actually do something and deliver. Engage regulators. So the central bank put out a paper on DLT that was a game changer, I would say, for Brazil in this space. So when we're going to look at the history of blockchain, this was a major milestone. It was even better because it was in English. So now everybody in R3 is all about Central Bank of Brazil and kind of supporting that project. So that's another key point, right? If the regulators are not engaged with what the private sector is thinking about in terms of the future state of financial services, then it's never going to happen, right? And in Brazil, you have engaged regulators, as evidenced by today. Unique problems. So I went on a road trip to Itu to go to eat filet parmigiana at Bar Alemão because everyone said it was amazing. And on the way back, I saw this place called Casa do Pamonha. Am I saying it right? And I was like, what is Pamonha and why is there a whole casa dedicated to it? And I went in there and I should have shown the picture here, but there was a picture that said if you bring 100 reais worth of moeda, you get a free pizza and a free suco. And I was saying, wow, this non tem troco problem, this doesn't exist in the US. Like, we could never imagine this problem. But, here we have a major issue, ninguém tem troco, and everybody has cell phones. And everybody uses their cell phones to pay electronically. And this is a unique problem in Brazil, right? You have you have a troco problem, you have an unbanked problem, but you have more cell phones than people. So here's an opportunity that doesn't exist in other countries. When I talk to Singapore about their economy, only 2% are unbanked. Their payment system is efficient. So Singapore and Project Ubin is only focused on the institutional. It's not focused on the retail. So there's some really unique problems here that I think are actually going to catapult Brazil by solving these problems as a leader in this space. And it's important to recognize that. All right, so what happened in the last year? So first of all, we have something real now to show, Project Fingerprint. This was done by our investors, which are B3, Bradesco, and Itaú. They came together and they created an app on top of Corda. And actually, it was really cool. This was before I was here or anybody from R3 was here. So they just used the Corda documentation that's available to everybody, and they built this really cool app. And they've already demoed it in New York and London at our members conference, and we consistently get great feedback. And what it is essentially a data sharing tool. So if I have 3 bank accounts and I change my address, why do I have to go to 3 different bank accounts and change that, or 3 different banks and change that? So the idea is that the customer controls their own data, they update it once, they share it with all banks. So it's a really cool demo. So we have something real that we can show the people who are kind of wondering what this is all about and what the solutions will look like. And that's really important. I mentioned the BCB research paper. And then lastly, R3 Brazil Limitada open. So I've spent the last year at R3 convincing everybody in R3 Global that Brazil is a worthwhile investment. It's worthwhile of our attention. They're convinced. We now have an office. We're hiring 6 people in the next 3 months. So my next year is going to be convincing Brazil that R3 is a worthwhile opportunity and worthy of our attention. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why. How much time do I have? Is there I'm good? 10 minutes? Okay, good. So first of all, for those who don't know, so R3 actually started as a dinner. So our CEO got 12 banks who were saying, what does blockchain mean for us? This is 2.5 years ago. And got them around the table and said, what can we do? And those 12 banks, 2.5 years later, are 90 banks and financial service providers within our consortium. And now we have offices all over the world, including Sao Paulo, 160 people and growing. And it's important to know that when we started out at R3, we actually didn't start out to build a platform or technology. It was just a consortium to drive consensus and share ideas. We figured out very quickly that none of the DLTs really worked for financial services. We didn't think that any could, although they were interesting for proof of concepts, we didn't envision any being able to actually go into production in a real enterprise with real audit requirements. So we decided to throw out everything and basically start from scratch based on the requirements of the banks with the idea of creating a decentralized open source platform that would get accepted by banks. And that's Corda. But before Corda, this is just an idea. So this is the entire global ecosystem, banks and all the regulators as well. So let me talk a little bit about Corda. So as I said, we didn't set out to build Corda, but once we saw that none of the distributed ledger platforms were fit for regulated financial markets, we started from scratch, built Corda. We did things very different than those who took blockchains and tried to modify them for financial services. As an example, what's blockchain? Well, blockchain in some ways is just another word for batch processing. So the way blockchain works is every X number of minutes, a block is mined and batch processed. But when we actually looked at what the bank's requirements were no bank asked for batch processing. So Corda, we made event-driven as opposed to batch processed. So that's just one example. The other piece is enterprise grade. So Corda 1.0 was released 3 weeks ago. Corda Enterprise will be released in January. So based on the feedback of what an enterprise actually needs to get this through their internal audit to implement it, we've created Corda Enterprise with all those privacy and scalability features. Finally, the code. So we looked at the development community of the banks, and we asked them, like, what code are you more comfortable with? And we based Corda on, it's Java-based, and we're now starting to get feedback from the development community who's already very familiar with this, that it's been much easier given their familiarity with Java. Another example, in R3, we believe that law is law and not code is law. So the legal contracts between the participants is really important. So Corda is the only distributed ledger that allows you to actually store the physical scan of the legal agreement within the architecture as opposed to having to reference another database. So these are all things that came from the banks and came from this consortium. And for that reason, we think that Corda is the best position to actually be adopted as a blockchain for regulated financial markets. So I mentioned Corda 1.0. So what is Corda 1.0? The key thing is API stability. So that means that when you develop an app on top of Corda, it won't break when we have the next version, right? And that's really important for us. Is it production ready? Sort of. Depends on the use case. Look, this is still early technology. So if you're talking about mission critical, 1 million transactions per second, and you want to put that in production tomorrow, we would advise maybe to take it slowly. But we are seeing production level apps coming out in the next 2 months. Typically a little bit smaller transaction size. I think starting January when Corda Enterprise comes out and Q1 of next year, you're really going to see an increase in the production level apps. So finally, how do you guys get involved? So one of the other things is when I came to Brazil, I said we need a membership tier that's more inclusive. So when we first started out, we had to fund ourselves. We had to build Corda. So the way our membership worked, it was very high. We now have a much more inclusive membership and different tiers that allows people to get involved at a very low price. Secondly, partners. So Accenture is globally one of our biggest partners. Accenture globally has become a leader in terms of central bank digital currency, and they've been involved in a project with us and Monetary Authority of Singapore called Project Ubin, where they're creating a digital currency for Singapore. And there's going to be some news on that in November. And we're already starting, I'm already starting to work with Guilherme to kind of bring that partnership as well as other partnerships here in Brazil. But we're just the platform. So, we think we have the right platform, but we're not. We need delivery partners. We need people building apps, development partners. And so, if we haven't talked yet and you guys are interested, we have support for partners. We have training as well. So please talk to me. And then lastly, training. So we've already done 2 training courses, Corda training courses in Brazil. We have a partnership with B3 Educational Institute. So we trained 50 people. But the idea is to continue that training. I'd like to run that training every month. It's very accessible. I've made the cost about 1/3 of what they charge globally, and the course twice as long, so that instructors can speak very slowly. So that's the story. That's why we're here. It's really important for me to kind of talk about our vision, and I think for us as an industry to come to consensus on what this means and be able to communicate it. The final thing I'll say is, I've worked in banking my whole life, and this is a unique opportunity for us to really change the world in a positive way. I think it's a once in a lifetime or once in a career opportunity. Nothing I did at JP Morgan made the world a better place. Maybe for Jamie Dimon in terms of making money, but there's no innovation that I can point to. But what we're doing here in the next 5 years is something that you can point to, I think, to your kids and your grandkids and say, hey, the way it used to work is we used to stand online for banks for 30 minutes, or we couldn't send a payment on the weekend. And your kids probably won't believe it, hopefully because of the solutions that we're building today. So thank you.